On this week's episode of The Blue-Headed Stepchild, I talked to Taylor Smith, who is the Deputy Director of Government Affairs for the Austin Board of Realtors. We discussed everything from short-term rental rules and Airbnb to protesting your property taxes. Y'all check it out. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. My name's Sam Lee. I'm the host of The Blue-Headed Stepchild. I'm here today with Taylor Smith. Taylor is the Deputy Director of the Austin Board of Realtors.
Government Affairs.
Current government Deputy Director of Government Affairs for the Austin Board of Realtors.
That's right. It's a long title, so.
It's 11 words.
It is.
Well, thank you for being here. And so in that role, just give us kind of like a high-level overview of what it is that you do.
Yeah, so I'm charged with kind of overseeing our advocacy program at the Austin Board of Realtors. We have a dedicated team of volunteers that support us and help shape the policy that then we advocate on here at the local level in Central Texas. We mainly focus on Travis County and particularly the city of Austin on housing policies and other policies that impact our members and their clients throughout Central Texas.
And so Austin Board of Realtors represents realtors throughout Central Texas, and there are how many?
There are about 17,000 realtors in Central Texas, and then across the state, there's 150,000, I believe.
Right. So a big kind of group that you represent, right?
Yes. Yeah. We are the largest trade association in Central Texas.
Wow.
And so that comes with a lot of responsibilities that our members take very seriously. And one of those is really advocating for their clients and for home ownership throughout Central Texas.
For sure. And in full transparency, I am a realtor. So I guess you are my, not my representative, but my advocate, right?
Yeah, I work for you. That's what we like to say. We work for all of our members on a daily basis, just like you work for your clients on a daily basis.
For sure. And I also serve on the legislative management team at the Austin Board of Realtors, which you help oversee along with Elizabeth.
Yes. Our legislative management team is a team of volunteers like yourself who help kind of shape and guide the policy recommendations that then go to our board of directors, which ultimately kind of guide where we advocate each year.
For sure. So at Austin City Hall, which is kind of your main stomping grounds, you said you obviously cover most of Central Texas, but Austin being the hub of that and where a lot of things permeate out from, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time there. Some of the bigger issues on the slate coming up right now and some of the main things that you are having conversations about include property taxes, right? It's that time of year. And so tell us what's going on with property taxes and specifically protesting appraisals. What does that mean?
Yeah. So it kind of backing up to, your property taxes, your tax bill, that's typically what homeowners are most worried about each year is how much is my tax bill going to go up? And that's a complex question that has a lot of stakeholders involved. Okay. Ultimately, your property taxes are guided by the rates that your local jurisdictions set. So like the city of Austin or Austin Independent School District. And so that setting of the tax rate actually doesn't happen until the fall.
Okay.
And that they adopt a tax rate, which then is applied for that coming year. And so starting in January, that's when your local appraisal district, like the Travis Central Appraisal District, is responsible for determining the value of your property, which then is used in that tax calculation. And so that tax calculation is pretty simple, or I'm going to dumb it down to a very simple equation.
We appreciate that.
It's a little more complicated.
That's okay.
But it's essentially your property value that is set by the appraisal district as of January 1st. So what your home would sell for if you sold it on January 1st of that year. And you take that value times the tax rate of your local jurisdiction, and that gets how much taxes you would pay for your property. Of course, you have to do that multiple times because your property is in more than one taxing jurisdiction, and so you just sum up all those taxable values.
So, for example, if you owned a home that they determined was worth $500,000, and then the sum of all those taxing jurisdictions came to 2%, then you would take the 2% times 500,000, and you would have a $10,000 tax bill at the end of the year.
No, actually, no, yeah. So you take if your taxable value of your property is $500,000.
Okay.
You would take that times the city of Austin's tax rate.
Okay.
And that equals a dollar value. And that's how much you owe to the city of Austin. Then you would do that same calculation for your school district and any other taxable jurisdiction you're in. And so your total tax bill would be all those sums.
Gotcha.
Essentially, you're paying to each jurisdiction.
So order of operations. Which
yes.
is, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. We do multiplication first, and then we add the sums together to get your final tax bill.
Yes, yeah. And so the biggest component of that, or the thing that a homeowner has probably the most control over, is that property value. The tax rates are set by the local jurisdictions. There is a public process in setting those tax rates. So you as an individual can go down in the fall when those tax rates are set to, argue that the city or your school district should have a lower tax rate, So, but again, that's set by an elected body typically. So your voice is always heard, but they will set that tax rate based on the needs of their entity. But your property value is set by your appraisal district, and there is a process in place to protest that value. Okay. So if you think the value that the appraisal district has set is too high, you can protest that and hopefully ultimately lower that value, which then ultimately lowers the value of your tax bill.
Okay, so to protest your appraised value, do you get a picket sign and go down to the Central Appraisal District's office? What does that mean to protest, and what does that process look like?
No, we are not encouraging people to take up signs and protest at the appraisal district.
Taylor told me to be here.
That would not be good. So no, you will be getting your notice of appraised value in the mail.
Soon, right?
Soon. My assumption is it will happen probably later this week. They'll start sending those out. Typically, in Travis County, the Travis Central Appraisal District, or TCAD, they send out those notices typically the second week of April. Okay. And so once you get that appraisal notice, it will outline 3 different values. It is your market value. That's the value that the appraisal district says, if your home was sold on January 1st, this is how much it would sell for. Then it will have your net assessed value. The net assessed value is if you're homesteaded, which we encourage everyone who owns their property and lives in the property to get their property homesteaded. If you are homesteaded, that net appraised value is one of 2 options. It's either last year's net appraised value plus 10%, which is the cap they can raise it, or it's your market value as of that year. So let's say if your market value is $500,000, but last year's net assessed value, because you have a homestead exemption, was only $300,000, your net appraised for this year would be that $300,000 plus 10%. Gotcha. And please don't ask me to do the math. So,
for example, we have a house that's worth $400,322.
Yes.
What's the math?
Yeah, we're not. I'm sure you can calculate that using ChatGPT or something.
Right. And one thing I just wanted to mention too, what homestead is, right? And so when you own a property and it's your primary residence, you have the option or the right to go to the state and say, I claim this is my homestead, and they give you some exemption or basically a bit of a discount on some of those taxing entities and their values, right? So it's a discount.
It's a discount, and the best thing about it is that 10% appraisal cap each year. Right. And so the goal of that is to, limit how fast your property taxes can increase. And so as soon as you buy your home, the best thing to do is file that homestead exemption so it can be put in place right away, because that then sets your future calculations for each year.
Right.
And then that third value is the taxable value. And that is your net appraised minus any other homestead or any other exemptions you have. So the city of Austin has a 20% exemption. The school districts have certain exemptions. And there's a number of other taxing jurisdictions that might provide some other type of exemption.
Right.
And so that's what you will get in the mail. And then that is, if you disagree with that number, that's when you start the protest process. And that involves, in Travis County, we really encourage everybody to do their appraisal property protest process online.
Okay.
A, it's just easier for you as a homeowner, and B, it does streamline the process and make it a little easier for the appraisal district to respond to the thousands of protests that we'll get each year. And so you have a certain deadline to file your protest.
They typically give you about 2 weeks.
2 weeks,
right?
Yeah, yes. And so the deadline is May 15th, or I want to say it's 30 days after you get your notice of appraised value, whichever is later.
So if for some reason they come out past April 15th, then you still get 30 days to file your protest.
Yes, yeah. But typically, Travis County, or sorry, TCAD sends it within that time frame, so that typically the May 15th is the deadline you need to worry about.
And people go online, right? You get your notice. You say, I disagree with this assessment, and you go online, and from there, what happens? Yeah,
so you'll go online, you'll file your protest. Before you file your protest even, you need to come up with ways to protest. So it's kind of a justification of why you think their value is too high and why you think, it should be lower.
Okay.
And there's several ways to do that. The best way, honestly, is to work with a trusted real estate professional like yourself.
That
can help pull some comps in the area to see, homes of similar sizes and ages, what they have sold for recently. And then that can be your kind of justification, and you'll submit that as backup when you file your protest. And then you'll go through the process. You'll get some kind of settlement offer, most likely from TCAD. You can schedule an informal hearing with a one-on-one appraiser to hear why they are justifying their decision or justifying their settlement offer to you, which could be lower. And then you can either accept that, or you can go to a formal hearing, which is in front of an arbitration board, which has three kind of citizens.
Members of the community.
Members of the community.
I hear commercials on NPR asking people if they want to apply to be on the appraisal review board, right?
Yeah. And so it's essentially kind of like a mini court case. You as a homeowner present your case, the appraisal district will present their case, and then the board, the 3-member board, will make their decision.
Is there any risk? And so, for example, I get an assessment in the mail that says my house is worth $400,000 and I think it's worth $350,000. Is it possible I go in there and I protest, and then they come back with, oh, since now that you're here, we think your house is worth $450,000, and go up?
Yeah, no, that is a common myth that we need to make sure we demystify.
Okay, glad I asked.
The appraisal district cannot increase the value beyond what is listed on your notice of appraised value. So the only thing that can happen is that it can go down, or it would stay the same. So there really is no risk to protest. Now, of course, if you are high, there's several companies you can hire to protest your property taxes for you, and they range from free services to expensive services. And so, if you're fighting over, $5,000, $20,000, but you're going to pay somebody X amount, maybe it's not worth it to protest, but you don't need to hire somebody to protest your property appraisals. You can do that yourself. And we actually have some workshops coming up to help kind of educate the community on how to do that themselves.
Awesome.
And so anybody listening can go to unlockmls.com/property protest. They'll find our upcoming workshops. The first one's on April 16th. That's a Wednesday. It's in the evening. It'll be at ACC South Campus. And then we have 3 others throughout the city that you can register for as well. So
awesome. And I'll put that information in the description.
Perfect.
So people have that information. Okay, a bigger socioeconomic question related to these property tax appraisals. So because Texas doesn't have a state income tax, right? One of the main ways that the state generates revenue is through property taxes, right? Like that's kind of how they pay for some of the schools and other social services, right?
Yes and no.
Okay. All right.
Technically, the revenue does not go to the state.
Okay.
The state has no property tax. The only property taxes are those local property taxes, and those go directly to those local jurisdictions.
Which most of it is schools, right?
So I want to say the majority of your bill, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it's like 60% of your bill typically is your local public school district.
Right. So 2/3 of it goes to funding schools.
Yes.
Okay, so the revenue doesn't go to the state, but it's money that the state would otherwise have to pay to make sure we have schools.
Yes,
right?
So the larger conversation, which is taking my Austin Board of Realtors hat off and having a private citizen hat off of this is Taylor Smith's personal opinion.
Okay.
If you really want to talk about addressing property taxes, we need to address how we finance public schools throughout Texas, because that largest share of your tax bill is that public school district.
Right.
And so one could argue that if school districts were adequately funded through the state, then the need for the property tax for the local school district would be smaller, and your tax bill would be smaller.
Right.
Again,
which could also then drive down home prices and increase affordability.
Yes, I mean, it would definitely drive down the cost of home ownership because your tax bill would be lower.
Right.
I don't think you could argue that it would drive down the cost of housing, like the price that you pay for the house, the home. But obviously, the overall annual cost would go down. But again, that is a larger school finance.
Well, I've got a follow-up question,
which is outside the realm of our policy priorities.
I understand, but you are infinitely knowledgeable about. Well, you're not infinitely knowledgeable, not to hype you up that high, but you are, very much in tune with housing policy in the city of Austin and the greater mechanisms behind it all, right? And so, I want to ask you too, there's an argument that if we all protest our property taxes, that, we're some way eating into the revenue that would be, paying for our schools. I don't know. Is that fair? But
I mean, that is one argument you could use. But at the end of the day, the appraisal process is designed to fairly tax all properties across the state in an equal and fair manner. And one way to make sure it's fair and equal is to protest, to make sure that whatever value TCAT or whatever a local jurisdiction you're in is accurately valuing your property. And if not, if they're valuing it too high, then it's not fair to you as a homeowner, and it's not fair to all of your neighbors who they're all based off of the same value. I mean, a similar system. So really, the protest process ensures that homeowners have a right to determine how their evaluation is set, and B, to make sure that the system is fair.
Sure.
And that's the overall goal. And then that determines how much your local jurisdictions have in tax revenue as they're setting the budgets for the future.
Right.
And ultimately, yes, one could argue that, well, if everybody protests, that means there's, lower valuations across the board. I would say they're fairer evaluations across the board,
right.
But that could lead into smaller revenues.
Right. But that doesn't mean that we should all pay unfair taxes.
Yes.
Just because of that, right?
Yes. And again, the local taxing jurisdictions ultimately have this final say of how much that tax rate is going to be. So they will get a number from the appraisal district saying, this is the total value of property in your jurisdiction. And then they would, build a budget based on what they think the tax rate they want to set. So if the value comes lower, if they need the same amount of revenue, they would just increase the tax rate.
That's a great point. No, that's a really good point.
And of course, there's always new property coming online as well that helps offset some of that too,
Right.
And then at the end of the day, as a homeowner too, you can work with your local taxing jurisdictions to determine, do we need certain services? Are there programs that, yes, we all love, but if it comes at a cost to negatively impacting housing affordability, maybe this year we don't need to fund that.
What would be an example of one of those things?
Oh, we're not going to dive
No,
into that.
Okay, all right. You hinted at it.
I hinted at it, but there's always going to be tough budget conversations.
Sure.
And ultimately, the elected officials, they're the ones charged with making those decisions. And as homeowners and as just, voters across the board, we need to make sure that each of us are individually communicating what our priorities are for that community, whether it's the city, the school district, so that then they build a budget based on that.
Gotcha.
Okay,
excellent. I like it. All right, we're going to move on from property tax appraisals to the WUI code.
The WUI code.
Woo, woo.
Woo, woo.
So, correct me if I'm wrong. So the WUI code has to do with protecting homes against homes and spaces against wildfires. And that is particularly important because Central Texas is at high risk for wildfires. And I read somewhere that it is 5th in the country in highest rating for potential wildfires, and it's the only one in the top 5 outside of California.
Yes, I believe that's accurate based on the one of the analysis, which was a nationwide analysis.
So what are they trying to change with the WUI code at City Hall?
Yeah, so the WUI code is the Wildland Urban Interface Code.
Okay.
It governs and regulates how new construction is built within a certain area of a community. And so for the city of Austin is the only major city in Texas that has adopted a WUI code. It was last adopted, I want to say, about 5 years ago.
So we already have one.
We already have an existing WUI code. Okay. And so this is just an update to that. And the WUI code is an international code. So an international board is kind of each year establishes updates to the international WUI code.
Just like you would have for like electricity and plumbing standards, right?
Yes. And so then communities will adopt those codes on a regular basis. Typically, cities do not update their WUI codes or even, let's say, plumbing codes every year because that would just that would not create predictability in the housing market.
It would be an admin nightmare.
It would be an admin nightmare. And so typically you adopt new codes, somewhere between 3 to 5 years, depending on the code. So this is, it's time for our WUI code to be updated. And that includes updating the WUI map. And so in the city of Austin, we have an existing map, and the proposed map is significantly larger than that existing map.
Okay.
The new map would cover about 71% of parcels within the city of Austin and about, I think, a little over half of just the land. And that's significant. It's a huge increase in what we have today. The biggest component of that change is Zone C, which is the least regulated zone in the WUI code, but still requires certain hardening of your home protections. And
this is specific to new construction?
It's new construction and significant remodels.
Okay.
So if you're an existing homeowner, if you don't do anything to your home, I'm
not going to have to harden it from
you
the
don't
outside?
have to harden your home.
Okay.
Obviously, it's encouraged that you do
Sure.
if you lived in one of these zones. And there's probably some financial benefits as it relates to insurance premiums if you do. But of course, hardening your home also comes with initial upfront cost of doing that. And so that Zone C is the largest increase. It would cover, I think, 61% of the parcels in the city. And so that's where some of our concern was at when we were looking at the WUI. The main concern that we had was how will the map impact existing homeowners and their insurance costs?
Okay.
The concern that a number of our members heard was either they were concerned themselves as a homeowner that their insurance rates are going to go up, or that they had been told by an insurance agent that, hey, the city is looking into putting your property in the WUI, which probably will raise your rates. Or they're learning from past experiences with like floodplains. When the floodplain maps changed in the city of Austin, existing homeowners who weren't in a 500-year floodplain but were now put into a 100-year floodplain saw their rates increase.
Right. And people are particularly sensitive to what's going on in the homeowners insurance market right now, because in the last few years, rates have gone up a bunch, right?
A bunch.
Like we're getting more hailstorms. I think hail and wind are kind of the leading factors in driving insurance rates up because, lots of new roofs, right? And so homeowners have experienced a lot of that recently. And so now they're particularly sensitive and on guard to things that may increase that further, right?
Yes. And so, again, that was our concern. And that's kind of how we initially approached the city and city staff and council offices about that concern. We have also talked with insurance agents. Some insurance agents, while they couldn't give us a specific, they did, based on their experience, they thought insurance rates would go up for those existing homeowners if they were placed into that zone. When we've talked to representatives of insurance carriers, who are the ones that actually set those models and set those rates, which I've learned a lot about the insurance industry that I did not know about until recently.
Sounds exhilarating.
For my knowledge now, your individual insurance agent apparently does not actually control your rates. It's something they are told by the carriers. This is the model. Put all your information in, and that will determine that homeowner's rate. And so, the insurance carriers representatives, they have expressed several times to us now that the WUI map will not impact anybody's insurance rates, because their map, they have their own maps, and which are based on other risk data and modeling, and that regardless of what the city does, they will rely on their maps and their data to set those rates. And so, the size of the city of Austin's map apparently is not taken into consideration by the insurance carriers. That's what we have been told.
And if that is true, then, from your perspective, it sounds like maybe a net positive and a good idea to continue updating this map and thinking comprehensively about wildfires and the risks to homeowners, especially in light of what just happened in California, right?
Yes, yeah. And we were never opposed to updating the WUI code or updating the map. We just expressed our concerns over the size of the map and that potential impact on homeowners. We still have some concerns about how that actually will, impact homeowners insurance, where we have been assured by the carrier industry that it will not. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out, But we do agree with the fire department and the insurance carriers that the map needs to be updated more regularly than it is now. So you can adopt a WUI code, every 3 or 5 years, but there's nothing stopping a city from updating the map annually.
Right.
And that's what we're encouraging, is because as the city grows, the map will change. Because there might be less wildland, because as housing developments come online, the map should potentially get smaller because there's less wildland. And then also it will take into consideration other factors that will change over time. And that will then help, lower the cost of housing if we have a map that is updated regularly, because then you're not hardening a home that might not need it, and you're making sure that the homes that are in the risk area are hardened, So.
Right. So if somebody owns a house that doesn't need to be updated and they're pouring money into it to meet these regulations, that is going to work its way into the cost of the house and,
yes,
get passed on to the next person when they go to sell it, right? And all those sorts of things.
Yes. Yeah. And particularly for new construction, we've been told a lot of the builders today have already on them by themselves adopted some of these best practices when it comes to wildfire mitigation. So a lot of some of it is already built into the cost of a home. But the new WUI code itself, we've been told, could impact the cost of a new construction on a range of like $5,000 to $10,000, which in the grand scheme of things, isn't that significant, particularly if you truly are mitigating the risk of wildfire, because, $10,000 ensuring that your home will be there after a wildfire is probably worth it than having to rebuild that home completely,
I'm sure residents of LA would pay a lot more than that to have their homes back. Right?
And so, and for for existing homeowners, really getting more education out there about what are some tips you can do yourself as a homeowner, or as big purchases come up. So, for example, if you do need to replace your roof in the future, maybe if you're in one of these areas, consider a roof that is in compliance with the code. Mm-hmm. And that, will help you in the long run, not only protect your house from wildfires, but then also hopefully would reduce your cost of your insurance as well. Right. So,
okay. All right. Woo woo.
Woo woo. Woo woo.
All right. Short-term rental.
Yes.
Airbnb, Verbo, all that jazz. I know it's been a hot button topic in Austin for years now, as Airbnbs have exploded here. And it's my understanding that the city is working on proposing some changes.
Yes.
What are those changes, and where do you and ABOR, Austin Board of Realtors, stand on those changes?
Yeah, so short-term rental regulations, or STRs, has been a very hot topic issue in Austin for years. The last time the city updated its short-term rental regulations was, I want to say 2015, 2016. It created a framework that really kind of separated the type of ownership. So it's individual homeowners that lived in a home versus investors who didn't live in the home, and they created different types of permits based on that. That ultimately was struck down in the courts, which essentially invalidated a significant component of the framework for the city of Austin's short-term rental regulations. And then for years, we had, a framework in place or regulations in place that weren't enforceable because of that court decision. That were not enforceable. Okay. Yeah. And so the city, the past year, and probably a year and a half actually, has been working on developing a framework that aligns with the court's decisions, but also will hopefully help address some of those bad actors. It's always the bad actors that ruin it for everybody.
Sure.
And if you're living next to a short-term rental property that constantly has those parties till 2 in the morning, or sometimes 4 in the morning, obviously
with groups of 20,
you're going to be frustrated,
right?
And you want the city to do something about that. But without a new framework, the city can't do anything about it. And so what the city staff developed was a framework that would put more or new regulations on the actual platforms themselves.
Okay, so on Vrbo,
on Airbnb. And so what it would do is it would require platforms on their listings in the city of Austin to have a required field that displayed that a property owner would put in their short-term rental license number.
So they would have to get a license from the city, display that on their listing in order to operate.
Yes,
because at current, I think like the big thing is, right?
The majority of STR operators are not licensed.
And when we say majority, we're saying, if my understanding, there's about 2,200 licenses and somewhere over 10,000 active STRs, right?
That's what they believe, yes.
So, 20% of people are doing it with a license.
Yeah.
And then the other 80 roughly, not.
Yes.
So this would drastically change that and say you can't even put it on Airbnb without entering a license number.
Yes. So that is the goal. The goal is to get more STR owners in compliance, to get a license, so that you're complying with this city, and B, that the city, if needed, can address any nuisances that your property might cause. And so that framework, again, required that field. It did not require the platforms to verify the number you put in.
So I mean, my license number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
As long as it matches, the length that is required, then yes, you could do that.
Interesting.
It'd be on the city to actually, look at all those listings and make sure those listings had valid license numbers. And that's just something the city is investing in. They're investing and looking at purchasing a third-party contract that would help kind of search those platforms using AI, I believe, to help kind of flag listings that might not actually have a valid permit number.
Getting them some resources for enforcement, right?
Yes. And then the other component of the framework would require the platforms to delist a property delist a listing if the city sent them a letter saying, for this reason, this listing needs to be delisted. And the main reasons would be invalid permit number, or they're a bad actor. Mm-hmm. And there's several steps that property that the city would have to go through to determine that a property is a bad actor. It's not like on your first violation that they would send a letter, but if you're a repeat offender, that's what they would then do.
Right.
And again, the goal of that is to get those property owners to take accountability and come into compliance with all city regulations like noise violations.
Right. It's my understanding that there's maybe some changes around the way taxes are collected, hot hotel occupancy taxes, and not to bore everybody again, going back to taxes. But
I mean, it all comes back to the money at some point.
It does. So tell me what's going on with hot.
Yes, and so that was the other component of the framework, and that actually that part, the hot tax collection, was already adopted by the council earlier this year.
Okay,
and so that ordinance requires all platforms in the city of Austin to collect and remit the hotel occupancy tax, or the hot tax, for their short-term rental properties directly to the city. Okay. So as of today, most platforms don't do that for the city of Austin. You as a property owner, it's your responsibility to collect that hot tax and then send it to the city.
And is that happening?
I mean, would you do it if you? I mean, would you even know how to do? I wouldn't know how to do that, But technically, it is required, and so that change not only helps the property owners because it's easier to make sure you're in compliance, but B, it makes sure that the city actually gets the hot tax.
And what does the city use that tax for?
It is for tourism, marketing. There's a number of things. It is very limited on how the city can spend those dollars. It's set by state regulations.
Okay.
But like the new convention center is a good example
Okay.
of where those hot tax dollars are going.
Nice. Okay. And I read that the mayor was pushing to table these changes because currently the Texas state legislature is in session, and they were waiting to see if there would be any state rules that might affect the proposed changes first, and then maybe wait until the legislative session dies down here in like a month or so before pushing forward with those. Do I have that correct?
You are correct.
All
yes.
right.
The proposed STR framework came to council. There was a public hearing on it. And instead of adopting it, what they did is they postponed the framework. They adopted the hot tax collection component, but they postponed the actual short-term rental regulations. Now, they did a procedural thing. They took the short-term rental regulations were originally in the zoning code or the land use development code of the city of Austin. They took those codes out, those regulations out, and they moved them to the business section. But they just simply moved the exact regulations over. So nothing, from a homeowner's perspective actually really changed.
But they did this because, let me see if I got this right. The last time it was shut down, when it went to the courts, it went to the Texas Supreme Court, the last rules they made, it said that if there's changing to the zoning, all property owners are supposed to be notified. And so that they were saying that everybody should have got something in the mail saying that the zoning is changing, and they use this as a technicality in order to strike down the previous STR rules. And so now they're moving it out of zoning into business practices.
Yes. Close. You're close.
I'm trying, Taylor.
It was a different court decision
Okay.
that decided that. The city of Austin, like most cities, they get sued often. The court case you're talking about was related to the land development code rewrite.
Okay. That's right.
Code Next was the original one, and then they stopped that process and then reinitiated it about a year later. And it was just called the Land Development Code Rewrite. They named it that because that's harder to put on a bumper sticker, or on a yard sign. But the courts invalidated the city of Austin's rewrite to their Land Development Code primarily because of that notification requirement you're talking about. That requires, if there are changes to zoning, that property owners within 200 feet of that property that's being changed to get individual notification. If you're rezoning the entire city, that is a very complex notification. It's essentially very hard to do.
Right. I read that it cost them like $500,000 to send out one notification to everybody, and it's
yes. And so when we're proposing these short-term rental regulation changes, the city had to do that notification, and they did that notification. And so since they already did the notification, they went ahead and moved over the regulations since they conducted those public hearings, but they adopted essentially, instead of the new framework that they were going to put into the business code, they just took the old framework and moved it over.
Gotcha.
And so the reason they did that, like you mentioned, is because the Texas legislature is in session right now. At that time, they knew that a bill probably would be filed that would circumvent this or preempt the city's framework. That bill has since been filed. It is in the House. It already received a hearing on it, and it is in the process of making its way through. That legislation would prevent cities or any local jurisdiction to regulate a platform. I believe the term is a global marketing platform or something like that, that connects two individuals to sell or lease something.
So it stopped the city of Austin of requiring Airbnb to, one, ask people to list a number, right? A license number.
Yeah.
And then also stop them of collecting hot taxes?
It wouldn't stop the platforms from collecting hot taxes. Okay. It would simply prohibit the city to regulate a platform in a manner that like would impact their business or require certain data to be personally identifiable data to be transferred to the local jurisdiction like the city.
Right.
And it would be applied to all platforms, not just Airbnb. It would also, the way the bill's very broad, it would apply to like Facebook Marketplace,
gotcha.
Craigslist potentially,
Right. Which might be good for my girlfriend. Could stop buying TV consoles.
I mean, I don't
love you, Carolyn. Okay, and I know you are, you're focused on local government, but where does that bill stand? You said it's in the House. Does it have co-sponsors? Does it look popular? Has the governor or the lieutenant governor said anything about their appetite to adopt it? Yeah.
So from talking to some of our counterparts at the state, there's probably a 50-50 chance of whether that bill gets approved or not. It just received a committee hearing, so it's still early on in the process. If it's voted out of the committee, then it will go to the House for a full vote and then eventually sent over to the Senate if the House votes it out. There's a number of ways the bill could move, and there's a number of ways that the bill could ultimately, fail. So it really just depends. Other cities are also looking at adopting new short-term rental regulations. The city of Houston has been discussing that as well. Theirs is a little different type of framework than ours. Requires, I believe, a little more regulations on the platforms than ours would. So time will tell on what happens. But that's the reason the mayor made that suggestion. And I think it is a good one, because why implement a process and why invest in particularly a third-party system to verify those license numbers if things are just going to change?
Yeah.
And so they're waiting until later this summer or fall to bring back that short-term rental discussion based on what happens to the state legislature. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you're up to at City Hall? Anything that you see on the horizon here being brought up by council members relating to housing, relating to other things that ABOR has an interest in that might be of interest?
I mean, the city will continue to be working on streamlining their permitting process. That doesn't really require any action by council. That's really just more working with the city manager's office and city staff.
So permitting meaning developers want to build new homes, and getting the permits to build those homes has historically been cumbersome. And they've, over the last couple years, they put in some site plan light and things like that to kind of streamline if you're building multiple units, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the permit process has definitely gotten better than where it was, years ago. And a lot of that is the result of Mayor Watson and his team. When he came to office, they brought on a third-party consultant, McKinsey, that looked at the development review process and then made some recommendations. And those recommendations have been implemented. And from the development community, particularly home builders, apparently it appears that a lot of those changes have been good, and the process time has decreased, but we still have high processing times, review times, and high development fees. And so really looking at what are other ways we can continue to streamline the process, potentially use third-party reviewers outside of the city to help reduce that time, because every 4 weeks of time in the review process cost a developer about $10,000 in holding costs.
Every how long?
Every 4 weeks.
Every 4 weeks costs $10,000
for one home.
And then that gets passed on to home buyers, right?
Yeah. And so, also just think about it for yourself. If you are building your home yourself, those additional holding costs for you, or that additional time, that adds up because, you're not in your home, you're probably renting, or you maybe haven't sold your other home yet, and the market could change. And so,
and the
again,
developer's paying taxes and insurance on those. They're having to push out other subcontractors and maybe pay fees for that, right?
Yeah. So really looking again at that process, eventually looking at the development fees. Budget will be a big year for the city of Austin. There are some significant budget challenges. And so the city is going to have a really hard time figuring out what to do. There has been talks about having a tax rate election. So a tax rate election is required if a city goes above, or if a city raises revenue above 3.5% than last year. They will probably have to do that, or they're really considering that because of the budget position they're in.
So meaning they have to put that on the ballot at an election, and then the voters have to approve whether or not the city can increase by that much, right?
Yes. And so that will be a very tough discussion this year. And then there's also the city's in the process of building a bond for 2026. It's most people probably have heard about it. It's called the Climate Bond Initiative. There's other names out there for it. But the goal of that is to look at how the city can become more resilient to the impacts of the environment and future weather patterns. A lot of that, most likely, I'm assuming, will be focused on infrastructure, so drainage, electrical, but I'm sure parks and other types of initiatives will be added into that bond package at some point. So that will probably come back to council, I'm assuming, later in the fall for further discussions, and then adoption to be put on the ballot. Probably spring of 2026. It would be put on the November 26 ballot. So that's a big...
Just the midterms, right?
Which
midterm ballot?
Midterm ballot, yeah. Right. So that'll be a big discussion as well, because again, it all comes back to taxes. And
there's a reason we focused on taxes. That's the conversation.
So if you put a big bond proposition on, that certainly is going to impact your property taxes moving forward. And so those are some of the big things that I think are on the radar. Some of those, the Austin Board of Realtors will have a position and we will get involved in, and some of those fall outside the scope of our public policy principles. And so it really just kind of depends on what is proposed and what comes up and whether we get involved or not. So,
all the details.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Taylor, I appreciate you taking the time with your infinite knowledge. And I do mean that.
Not infinite, but I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, that's all, guys. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you.